why everybody wanted to join European Union, not because they wanted to forfeit their national feelings and their national pride, but simply to get access to the market and all the benefits that went with it. And then Europe, or United Europe, and the machinery, I call it machinery bureaucracy in Brussels, was not able to fill that bloodless behemoth with blood, with feeling. There's no feeling, no warmth coming out from Brussels. Brussels is bureaucracy, and even the parliament doesn't have power. United or European Union is not a democratic affair yet. It's an administrative, economic affair. And this is the gap between the people in the different countries, particularly also now in Germany, and what politicians and the economy wants to make out of United Europe. We have to fill that gap and overcome that gap. And we are now, I think, in this stage or a phase that we are disillusioned also in Germany. Up to now, European Union was a sunshine economy affair. And now we are disillusioned, and now we are coping, trying to find a new stage. I mean, building such a huge project like a United Europe can't
it's not
be
going to
done
happen
in
overnight,
1 year,
is it?
even not in decades.
Yeah, it's not going to happen overnight. Christian, sitting as a spectator in Europe, but outside of the European Union, of course, what's your assessment of what went wrong? And how concerned are you to see, for example, the rise of far-right parties and the lectures that we're getting from leaders that says multiculturalism has failed, it's dead, and it's not just a factor of the economic cycle, it gets worse than that?
You know, not the parliament, not the government say no to membership of the European Union. Our people say no. We have a direct democracy, and I can say thank you to the people. The introduction of the euro was a political decision. The idea was to let the Europeans feel that they together now. For that purpose, it would have been better to put up flags in each garden from each European,
Make sure you speak to
each European, instead of distribution euro. And the manipulation was by politics, happiness as some country, like some country in the south of Europe, they embellished their statistic, even to they never fulfilled necessary criteria to join the euro. And now we have a big problem. Of this reason, for this crisis can certainly be found the cultural differences between the member countries. There's big, very, very big difference in this country. There are countries like Greece that live, from hand to the mouth, where the crisis was different at the count's brightness. The public finances were treated recklessly, and all of necessary reforms were postponed until the pressure from the lender got so big that no alternative solution could be taken into account. The overdue reforms had to be taken under the pressure of the creditors among the European countries facing the biggest economic trouble. Only Ireland was relatively successful fighting the crisis. This is mainly due to different political culture, as we may observe it also in Scandinavian countries and Germany, also Germany. Generally, I say, to my opinion, there is to say is impossible to have a common economy politics for the whole of the European Union.
Interesting. Okay, you make a very good point. Let's move on to talk of multiculturalism, which was the sort of the nub of what we've been asked to discuss today. We've heard leaders sounding the death knell on what they consider the failed concept of multiculturalism within the European space. If it has failed, is it simply a function of falling economies, or does it go deeper than that? I just want to bring you in, Gunther, again at this point. Angela Merkel's complaint about immigration and immigrants is that most Turks and Muslims who went to Germany in the 1960s to jumpstart the German economy after the war have not integrated into German society. And we are hearing this again and again across the European space. Multiculturalism, many people say, has failed. Do you agree with what Angela Merkel says?
Though she is my chancellor, I don't agree totally with her. And I wouldn't say multiculturalism failed completely. It failed, not completely. There are other examples where you can recognize it worked. You mentioned that when, after the Second World War, West Germany was reconstructed. You said the foreign labor came to jumpstart German economy. No, sorry. The Germans themselves, with American help, reconstructed Germany in a tremendous short time. And then the economy was already, the German Wirtschaftswunder, the miracle was already there. And then we needed labor force. And then the first foreign labor force came into Germany. They were Italians, Spaniards, and then from former Yugoslavia. And then the second kind of wave were the Turkish people in the second half of the 60s. The difference was the people who came from European countries like Spain, Italy, they are totally integrated, no problem at all. But when the people from Turkey were hired, they were hired as so-called guest workers. We expected them to come, and they themselves had the same idea. I'm going there, doing a job for 1 or 2 years, going back to Turkey, building a house, and it's only a limited period. It wasn't a limited period. We didn't expect them to stay, and they didn't hope to stay or had in mind to stay. That was the first generation of the Turkish foreign laborer, and they were not. That's another problem in our integration policy. Due to our, again, history, it was not, let's say, politically correct to demand from them to learn German language. Okay, it's difficult, but not on a literary level, just on daily life level. So they could stay there without picking up German. It was simply on the factory floor, Mehmet, do this, Ali, come. Not beyond that. And then the second generation, when they stayed, people were born there, and they felt not accepted. Why? Because, first of all, a different culture. You know, all the other nations were from that European history, more or less. But Turkey still is not a completely European country. And that was the first difference. The second difference was that they felt not accepted, therefore they felt more or less, unfamiliar and did not try to integrate. We didn't demand, and they were not ready, and they were not instigated or not motivated. Third generation, they felt more or less disguised sometimes. The third generation now, they are feeling very proud, say, okay, we are of different nations, but we don't hide it, we show it. And then we have very shining examples of fully integrated people. There are even ministers, and that female ministers in some Länder, state governments, of Turkish origin. And there are Turkish doctors and Turkish teachers and officers.
So the process of integration is working, you're saying, at this point? You're saying the process of integration is working at this
Yeah.
point, but it's taken 3 generations. Let me stop you there. Rustam, I know that you wanted to come in here. When you listen to this discussion and you perceive it through the prism of Central Asia, what are your thoughts?
Добрый день.
Good day.
Бисмиллахи рахмани рахим.
In the name
Вы
of God,
знаете,
Almighty and
я
All-Merciful.
много для себя
You know,
нового открываю
I
здесь.
discover new
Первое,
things
что
here, a
впервые
lot of
открываю,
them.
что немцы
First thing I discover is
такая
that Germans
романтическая нация. Со времен
are
был
such a romantic
протестанты,
nation.
любящие труд, очень
Protestants,
серьезные
they're
люди.
hard-working,
Как юная девушка
and
эмоционально
sometimes
объединяется
they're
в Европу,
emotional as a young lady.
не зная
They
последствий.
jump into Europe without
То
thinking
они в
of
60-х
implications.
годах
Or then in the
приглашают
60s,
себе турков и
they
не
bring in
знают, что
Turkish
когда мы
people and don't
приглашаем
know that,
трудовые
that when you
ресурсы,
invite
мы
labor
приглашаем в первую
resources,
очередь
you
людей
invite,
со
first of
своими
all,
привычками,
people with their
обычаями, со своей
habits,
религией.
traditions,
понятно.
and religion. That
И
should
это
be
немцы,
clear,
немецкие
seemingly.
предприниматели.
And these are
Настоящие в
Germans, German
70-е годы
entrepreneurs who
был
insisted
отменен
that
закон о
in the
ротации. Когда в
70s, the
60-м году вы
rotation laws to be
приглашали
banned. So in
иностранные
the
рабочие
60s,
силы,
when you invited foreign labor,
предусматривалось, что они
it
поработают
was
2-3 года и
planned that
уедут.
they'll work for
В
2 or 3
70-м
years
году
and will
именно
leave.
немецкие
In
предприниматели
1970, it was
отменили
German
ротацию,
businessmen
потому что
who
там было
canceled,
выгодно.
revoked
Человек,
rotation,
который
because
работает
it actually
больше,
made sense for them.
его не надо переучивать,
Someone
это выгодно
who works
предпринимателю.
there
Неужели
longer
не
is
думали о
more
последствиях,
beneficial.
что
You don't
когда
need
человек
to
долго
train
не
him again.
уезжает из страны,
But don't you
он
think
образует
that there
свои
will be implications when a
сообщества.
person
Ему нужно
doesn't leave the
построить мечеть,
country
потому
for a
что
long time?
их уже
They
много, он
form
должен
communities, they start
соблюдать
building
свои религиозные
mosques
традиции.
because they have to
Так вот,
adhere to their religious tradition.
все, что сделано
So,
сейчас в Европе,
Everything that is done in
сделано
Europe
руками
now
европейцев.
was done by the hands of the
Привезенные люди
Europeans. The
в этом
imported
нисколько
people
не виноваты.
are not to blame for
Европейские
that.
нации, прежде всего
European
немецкая,
nations, first of all,
французская,
German,
английская,
French,
извиняюсь,
English,
показали себя слабыми нациями.
have
Ведь слабые
showed
нации — это не
themselves
только
as
нации,
weak
у
nations.
которых мало
Not
денег, у которых
weak
слабая
nations in the sense
экономика.
that they have poor economy or don't have
Более
enough
слабые
money.
нации, у которых не
Weaker
хватает своих
nations
людских
that don't have their
ресурсов.
own human
Потому
resources.
что в результате
For,
этой
as a
слабости
result of that weakness,
меняется этнический
ethnic
облик ваших городов.
look of your
Меняется
cities
этнический облик
changes.
вашей страны.
Ethnic look
И
of
вы
your country
перестаете
changes,
быть
and you
немцами,
stop
которыми были в
being
50-е.
Germans
Это не
that you were
только
in
немцам,
50s.
говорю.
And
И
it's not true
французам,
only for
и
Germans, it's also true
британцам.
for
Вы
French
перестаете
or
быть
the
теми
English.
немцами, британцами,
You
французами,
stop
которыми
being
были
those
50 лет
French,
назад.
those Germans,
И ваша
those English
гражданская нация
that you were
уже
50
другая.
years ago.
Да,
And
не
your
уходит
civilian
турецкая
nation is
женщина
different.
министр,
Yes,
потому
there is
что она
a
гражданка.
female
То есть
Turkish origin minister.
ничего неожиданного не происходит.
But
Вот
there's
эта
nothing
наивность, она,
unexpected
конечно,
about that.
смущает.
And that
Мультикультурализм
is
не отменим
confusing.
уже.
And
Есть
multiculturalism
грубое
can no longer be
русское
banned.
выражение «фарш
There's
невозможно
a
провернуть назад».
Russian harsh saying that
Рыба не плывет
ground meat will
хвостом
never
назад.
become
Ну, я могу много
meat
пословиц
again,
приводить. Да.
or
Это
fish
уже
cannot swim
состоялось.
backward.
Госпожа
It's something
Меркель,
that had already
господин
happened.
Кэмерон,
And Madam
господин
Merkel,
Саркози
Mr.
говорят то, что они
Sarkozy,
должны были говорить, потому что они правые
others, they say
политики.
what they have to say because
Они
they're
правые
right-wing
центристы. На
politicians.
следующем
They're
витке
right
истории к
centrists
власти
or whatever.
придут
But at the next
социал-демократы и
circle of
будут
history,
говорить
social democrats
несколько
will come
другие
to
вещи.
power,
Ничего
and they will say
неожиданного
something
госпожа
different.
Меркель не
But there's-
сказала для политика
Madam Merkel didn't say anything unexpected for a
правоцентристского толка.
politician of a
Поэтому, но,
right-centrist
тем не менее,
orientation.
Европа
But
развивается.
still, Europe
Другого
is
пути, как
developing.
у
There is no other way
мультикультурализма, у нее
than
нет. И другого пути,
multiculturalism.
как
There is no other way
объединения нет тоже, потому что, ну,
than to
нынешние
integrate.
трудности
Because
происходят только из-за того, что что-то
Today's difficulty
вначале
is
не просчитали.
derived
Не договорились
from
на берегу. Мы с
miscalculation in the
вниманием
beginning, from
в
miscalculation
Евразии смотрим на то, что происходит в
before you
Европе,
start
потому
the
что
journey.
мы
We're talking
переживаем те
about
же
Germany, but
процессы,
it's
что вы
true
вначале, у нас есть ваш
for
опыт.
Europe. We
Сначала
have the
мы
same experience
относились к
actually.
нему
Later than
даже
you,
с
much later,
восхищением,
we actually
построение
admired
государства.
it, the way you
А сейчас
built
мы
up your
задумаемся, когда
state.
в наш
But now we're
только
thinking
что
when our
создающийся Европейский
newly
Союз
created
Казахстана, России и
European
Беларуси
Union of a kind,
просится
Russia,
Киргизия и
Belarus and
Таджикистан,
Kazakhstan,
мы
Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan
задумываемся,
asking
а
to
надо ли?
join. We're
Потому что
thinking, should we do
слишком
that?
как бы не хотелось, как
Because
бы
no
мы
matter
не были
you like
романтичны,
that,
мы
no
были
matter how
романтичны.
romantic you
Мы
want to
жили
be,
в одном
we
государстве.
actually used to live in
Но
one
тем не менее мы
country.
задумываемся,
But we still think
не
now,
получится ли так, как
wouldn't we end up
в нынешней объединенной
as
Европе, и мы будем говорить, вот эти
today's
южане, они
united
слишком много тратят
Europe,
денег и мало работают.
that the
Давайте
Southerners spend too much money
посмотрим, как
and
они
are not
работают,
that
определим их
hardworking.
место в нашем
Maybe
союзе.
why don't we
но
first
потом
agree
будем
on
меняться.
what their place will be in our union, and then we will unite. Thank you.
Vitaly.
Я не согласен с
I
Рустамом
disagree with Rustam
того, что мы
in the sense
даже
that
более романтичны,
we're even
что
more
только
romantic,
сегодня мы
actually,
задумались
and
об этих
that only
вопросах.
today we started thinking about these
Правильно он
questions.
сказал?
He said many
Кроме
right things,
одного,
except for one thing.
В чем главная ошибка,
what is the main
возможно, уже
mistake
исторически вина
and
европейцев,
maybe
из
possibly
тех,
historical guilt of the Europeans. I mean, those sitting in this panel to my right. Because just as it was said yesterday, I am Russian, Rustam, we're not Europeans according to you. So what are the Europeans to blame? That they thought that they will remain the strongest, the smartest,
и самыми
and the most
богатыми.
the richest.
То, что Европа давно
The
уже не
fact that
самая
Europe
сильная,
is
это
no
понятно.
longer
По сравнению
most powerful is clear,
с США, с Китаем,
since US and
даже с
China,
нынешней Россией,
even
что
with
Российская
contemporary
Федерация
Russia,
не
and
самая
forget about
сильная.
Soviet Union, Europe is not the
То,
strongest.
что не самые богатые, тоже
Not the
теперь
wealthiest
очевидно,
is also
хотя
quite
еще
obvious now,
не среди бедных находится.
although, of course, definitely
Но,
not poor.
конечно, от того, что европейцы
But the
самые
fact that
умные,
Europeans
это
are the
будет
smartest,
последнее, от
that
чего
will be the last
вы захотите
bastion
отказаться.
that you will ever give up.
Но надо признать,
You need to admit that.
вот то, что говорил Рустам, но
What
неужели
Rustam
вы этого
said,
не видели?
didn't you see that looking into the
Я
future?
относился к числу
I
евроскептиков.
was among the
давно
Euroskeptics.
уже. Да, еще
And
в
for-
Алмате,
for a
когда
long so.
проходил этот форум,
When this
на
forum
несколько
was
другой
hosted
сцене,
in Almaty on a different
5
stage,
лет назад, 4
maybe
года
5
назад,
years
когда
ago, 4
кто-то
years ago, when someone said,
пытался
when someone attempted to
сказать
say that
со сцены, что вот в Евросоюзе
a
что-то
similar
не
stage,
так,
that
что
something's
там
wrong in
кризис, что,
EU,
возможно,
that there is a
он будет
crisis, that
распадаться, на него
maybe it will
смотрели вот эти
disintegrate.
европейцы.
People from Europe were looking at that person
либо как на идиота, либо как на
thinking, are
провокатора.
you an idiot or
То,
provocateur?
что сейчас говорит Меркель, Саркози, Камерон и там половина
Things that Cameron, Merkel and Sarkozy and half of Europe are saying now
в том числе на
have been
этом
told
вот Евразийском
here,
форуме.
including
Только это вами не
in this
слушалось.
Eurasian
не
Media Forum, but then
слушалось.
you ignored it, you didn't hear it.
Значит, все эти процессы
So all these
очевидны
processes
для
are
кого?
obvious,
Для
but
тех,
who
кто жил в Советском
are
Союзе.
these
И, в
processes obvious to?
принципе,
For
вот
those
этот
who lived in
панель
the Soviet
нужно
Union.
было
And this
начинать не с
panel
того
actually should have
угла
started not
и
from
идти в
that
эту
end and moving
периферийную
this
для
way
вас
into
сторону.
what you consider to